Giancarlo Rossi had walked into rooms where grown men begged for their lives. Nothing moved him until tonight. He pushed open the east wing door of his mother's Tuscan villa and heard a sound that didn't belong in that house. A cry newborn small, then another, then a third. 3 cribs, 3 infants, and, standing behind them, calm as marble, was the woman he had signed out of Italy 9 months ago. Amara Bennett, his ex-wife. Now do the math. He deported her 9 months ago. These babies are newborns. She was already pregnant when he signed those papers. What shattered him wasn't the babies. It was his mother. Signora Sofia Rossi stood beside Amara, not behind her son. When Giancarlo opened his mouth, her voice hit the room like a verdict. Don't speak to me. You deported her. I hid your bloodline. If you love stories where powerful men are forced to earn what they thought they owned, subscribe to Aurora Love Saga and hit the Princess and Zand bell. Drop a comment with your city and 1 word for what you're feeling. The Praca woman who engineered this just pulled into the driveway and she doesn't know. Amara is alive. Let's rewind 6 minutes. Giancarlo Rossi, 34 years old, heir to the Rossi Syndicate, controller of half the private financial corridors running through Milan and Rome, arrived at his mother's Siena estate. On a Tuesday evening in early October, his driver, Marco, opened the rear door of the black Maserati. His security swept the perimeter. Everything was choreographed, rehearsed, predictable. He was here for a quarterly family review. That's what his mother's assistant had called it, routine espresso and paperwork. But the moment he crossed the marble foyer, something felt off. The staff wouldn't meet his eyes. Not one housekeeper, not one guard. Every single person in that house looked at the floor when he walked past. And if you've ever been around people who fear power, you know what that silence means. It means they know something. You don't. He passed a hallway table where fresh wildflowers sat in a vase, anemones and white cosmos, the kind his mother never kept because she preferred camellias, a small detail, the kind most people would miss. But Giancarlo had survived 34 years in a world where missing small details got people killed. Something in this house had changed. Not the furniture, not the lighting, this energy. So he didn't knock on the east wing door. Men like him don't knock. He pushed it open, stepped inside, and his entire world restructured itself in under 6 seconds. 3 cribs, white linen, the soft hum of a baby monitor, the faint, warm scent of baby powder mixed with something floral, cocoa butter and lavender, a scent he hadn't smelled in 9 months, a scent he had once loved, waking up to, a scent that used to cling to his pillows long after Amara left the bed, the kind of scent that lived in the walls of memory and ambushed you when your guard was down. Amara stood near the window, her back partially turned. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't anxious. She was folding a small blanket with the quiet efficiency of a woman who'd been doing this for weeks alone. She'd lost weight since he last saw her, her collarbone sharper, her frame leaner. But she stood with the kind of posture that didn't come from comfort. It came from surviving without any. She didn't look up when he entered. She didn't flinch. And that, more than the babies, more than the impossible logistics, told Giancarlo he had already lost something he couldn't buy back. Because Amara Bennett used to look at him like he was the safest place in the world. She used to reach for his hand across dinner tables in restaurants where no one else looked like her. Her grip would say, "I chose this. I chose you." He remembered their wedding. A small private ceremony on the Amalfi Coast 3 years ago. White magnolias. His mother and Amara's cousin Lena as the only witnesses. Amara's hands had shaken when she held the flowers, and his eyes hadn't left her face for the entire ceremony. That woman was gone now. She looked at him like he was a stranger standing too close to her children. His mother sat in a high-back chair near the nursery entrance. 62 years old, Signora Sofia Rossi. She had buried a husband who tried to sideline her from the family's legal holdings. 2 years before his death, and she had outlasted him with such precision that by the time he was in the ground, every document bore her name. She had survived 2 syndicate restructurings, 3 attempted coups from rival factions, and held control of the Rossi family's legitimate empire for 3 decades. Not through charm, through an iron understanding of one principle. Blood is not loyalty. Behavior is. Tonight she wore a dark navy silk dress with silk embroidery, her posture straighter than the walls around her. A cup of ristretto, dark roasted espresso, sat untouched on the lacquered table beside her, still steaming. She had been waiting, not nervously, the way a chess player waits after placing a decisive piece. Giancarlo turned to her. His jaw was tight. His voice dropped to that low, dangerous register that made grown men step backward. "Mama, explain this to me." He spoke Italian, because honorifics were the last weapon he still had with her, the only language that still required her to acknowledge him as her son before her opponent. She replied in English, deliberate, pointed, because Amara was standing there and Signora Rossi had already chosen a side. "9 months ago," she said, "you put your pregnant wife on a plane. You didn't investigate. You didn't verify. You signed what that woman beside you told you to sign, and you erased the mother of your heirs like she was a line item in a contract." Giancarlo's fist clenched at his side. "I didn't. I know she was. That is exactly the point. Silence. The kind that has weight. A man who controls an empire," Signora Rossi continued, "should at minimum control in his own information. You failed, so I corrected it. Let me pause here and tell you something about Italian family power that outsiders often misunderstand. In elite Italian households, especially ones tied to old money or syndicate influence, the matriarch is not decorative. She is the root system. She controls inheritance lines, marriage approvals, medical records, legal trusts. She is the person who decides which grandchild carries the family seal. The men sit at the head of the table, but the women built the table. And in the Rossi family, Sofia didn't just build the table. She owned the room it sat in. So when Signora Rossi says, "I corrected it," she doesn't mean she offered emotional support. She means she activated a network. She means she moved legal pieces across town continents. She means she chose Amara over her own son's decisions. And that is not forgiveness. That is strategy. But Giancarlo wasn't ready to hear that. Not yet. Because he was still staring at Amara. And she still hadn't looked at him. The smallest baby, the girl, made a soft sound in her sleep. Amara crossed to the crib without thinking, smoothed the blanket, hummed something low. Her hand never trembled. Giancarlo watched her, the way her body knew exactly what each child needed before they asked. He had never seen her this complete, and he had never felt this far away. "Now, I know what you're thinking. How did Amara even get back into Italy? How did a deported woman end up inside the most protected estate in Siena, surrounded by Rossi security and a private medical suite? We'll get there. But first, you need to understand what happened 9 months ago at Fiumicino Terminal 4. Because the deportation wasn't a mistake, it was engineered. And the woman who engineered it just pulled into the driveway. To understand how Amara Bennett ended up in a deportation corridor at Fiumicino, with a wedding ring she was about to give back, you need to know how Elena Bianchi entered Giancarlo's world. She didn't stumble in by accident. 18 months before the deportation, she appeared at a fundraising gala at the Palazzo Pitti. The event was hosted by a Rossi-affiliated cultural foundation. She was introduced as the daughter of a shipping executive based in Genoa, a background carefully manufactured to pass the kind of surface-level vetting Giancarlo's team ran on new contacts. 3 layers of shell companies, a clean LinkedIn. 2 articles in business journals that mentioned her family's holdings. Everything checked. Nothing was real. She was beautiful, composed, fluent in 3 languages. And most critically, she never once pursued Giancarlo directly. She let proximity do the work. A shared seat at a benefit. A brief, intelligent comment about market regulation at a dinner party at Il Pagliaccio. A polite hello at a charity auction in Tuscany. She became a familiar presence without ever becoming a visible threat. By the time she was positioned as Giancarlo's business associate, she had spent over a year mapping his patterns, his pressure points, the names he trusted, the hours he kept, and most importantly, the blank to those growing distance between him and Amara. Because that distance was real, Giancarlo's world didn't pause for marriage. Late nights became missed dinners became forgotten anniversaries. And Amara, who had left her career at the American Embassy in Rome to build a life with him, found herself increasingly alone in a country where she was already an outsider by every visible metric. Let me tell you something about Amara that nobody in Giancarlo's world ever bothered to learn. She had a master's degree from Georgetown in cultural diplomacy. She had been trained to read body language across 3 languages. She knew how to walk into a room of men who didn't expect her and leave with the deal she came for. Skills she had. Skills no one in the Rossi circle ever asked about. She was the only black woman at most of those dinners, the only foreigner, the only person without generational access to the language of power being spoken around her. She had learned to carry herself through hostility with the kind of grace that looked like calm but was actually armor, and armor costs energy. There was one night 8 months before the deportation, when she came home to their Trastevere apartment, sat in front of the bedroom mirror, and stayed there for 20 minutes without moving. She didn't cry. She didn't text Giancarlo, who was still at the office. She just unbraided her hair slowly, one section at a time, and breathed. That was the cost of grace. And while she was paying that cost alone, Elena was 3 blocks away having dinner with Giancarlo at a private dining room in Rome, making him laugh. Elena didn't seduce him. She validated him. She made him feel understood in the professional spaces where Amara couldn't follow. She mirrored his language, anticipated his needs, and, slowly, surgically, she began reframing Amara's presence as a liability. She doesn't understand the pressures you're under. She's not from this world. She's holding you back from the alliances that could solidify your position. She never said these things directly. She wove them into silences, implications, the architecture of what wasn't said. And Giancarlo, exhausted, overextended, and too proud to admit he was neglecting his wife, let someone else narrate his marriage. So when the moment came, Elena executed it with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing for months. Over 3 weeks, she quietly introduced a fabricated concern to a mid-level immigration officer at the Polizia di Stato, Rome field office. Not a lie dramatic enough to trigger an investigation. A whisper precise enough to trigger a review. A question about Amara's visa, sponsorship, a suggestion that her presence posed a reputational liability to the Rossi family's legal holdings. The paperwork didn't say deport. It said, expedited voluntary departure under advisory review. Same result, cleaner language. And Giancarlo, buried under 3 simultaneous business conflicts that week, including a €200 million Genoa port acquisition, didn't read the fine print. He read Elena's summary. She told him it's a precaution. It protects the family. He signed. He signed away his wife. Not because he didn't love Amara, but because in that moment, he trusted the wrong voice. Now, picture the corridor at Fiumicino Terminal 4. Amara stood there with one carry-on bag and a composure that confused every guard in the room. She didn't cry. She didn't shout his name through the glass. She didn't collapse into the kind of dramatic grief that makes for good television. She had spent 2 years learning how to survive rooms where she was the only person who looked like her. And right now, in this corridor, with airport security flanking her like she was a criminal, instead of a wife, she wore that armor one last time. Instead of breaking, she walked toward Giancarlo slowly, steadily, with the kind of posture that comes from being underestimated your entire life and learning to carry herself like the answer to every doubt. She reached for his hand. He thought she was going to hold it, maybe beg, maybe whisper something that would make this easier for both of them. She placed her wedding ring, a platinum band with a single black diamond, into his palm, closed his fingers around it, looked him in the eye for the last time. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything. I will never ask you for anything again. Then she turned, walked through the gate, didn't look back, and Giancarlo stood there holding a ring that still carried her warmth, watching the woman he had married under a canopy of white magnolias on the Amalfi Coast disappear into a terminal, like she was never real. Elena touched his arm. It's better this way, she said softly. He didn't answer, but something inside him shifted, a crack so small he wouldn't notice it for months. The kind of fracture that doesn't hurt right away. It just weakens the foundation, quietly, slowly, until everything built on top of it comes down, and everything was about to come down. Because what Giancarlo didn't know, what nobody in that airport knew, was that Amara wasn't traveling alone. She was 6 weeks pregnant. The next ultrasound was going to reveal something that would change the entire Rossi bloodline. 6 weeks after the deportation, a clinic in central Rome, not the kind with marble floors and complimentary sparkling water, the kind with fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, and a receptionist who called your name twice because the waiting room was too loud. Amara had arrived in Rome with almost nothing. The bank accounts she'd shared with Giancarlo were frozen within days of her departure. Not by him, by Elena's quiet maneuvering through the Rossi financial office. The Trastevere apartment had been sublet. Her professional contacts in Milan were useless from this side of her own grief. She moved into her cousin's spare bedroom in Testaccio. Lena Bennett, 34, ICU nurse, at Policlinico Umberto I. Single mom to a 7-year-old daughter named Sofia, the only person Amara trusted without conditions. Lena gave her the back bedroom, a mattress on the floor, a quilt their grandmother had stitched in Sicily 40 years ago. She said one thing the night Amara arrived: you stay as long as you need. We don't talk about him unless you bring him up. That was their grandmother's rule. Family doesn't ask, family stays. Amara had come to the clinic, expecting confirmation of a single pregnancy. The ultrasound technician moved the wand across her stomach, paused, moved it again, then looked at Amara with an expression that was half awe and half concern. Signorina Bennett, you're carrying 3. Amara blinked. 3 what? 3 babies? Triplets? The room didn't spin. The walls didn't close in. Amara processed it the way she processed everything. Quietly, completely, with immediate strategic clarity. 3 children tied to the Rossi bloodline. 3 potential heirs. 3 tiny lives that, if discovered by the wrong people, wouldn't be seen as babies. They'd be seen as leverage. In that sterile clinic room, Amara made a decision that it would define the next 9 months of her life. No one could know. Not Giancarlo, not his associates, not even her own family beyond what was absolutely necessary. Because the Rossi world didn't operate on love. It operated on assets. She went dark, changed her phone number, used Lana's address, saw a midwife who took cash. The nausea didn't last weeks, it lasted months. The weight pressed against her spine like a sentence. Nights when she lay awake, wondering if her body could even survive delivering 3 children without the close medical infrastructure she would have had in Milan. All of it alone. There was one night 8 months in that almost broke her. Tuesday, Lena was working a double Brezen shift. Sofia was asleep. Amara filled the tub with warm water and lowered herself in slowly because her body didn't bend the way it used to. She placed both hands on her belly, and for the first time in 9 months, she let herself speak to her children out loud. I don't know if I can do this. Her voice cracked on the second word. I don't know if my body can carry all 3 of you to the end. I don't know if I can keep you safe in a country that didn't want your mother. I'm sorry I'm not stronger right now. She cried without making a sound. The water went cold. She didn't move. When Lena came home at 6:0 the 42,000, morning, still in scrubs, and found Amara still in that tub, she didn't ask questions. She drained the cold water, wrapped Amara in a towel, sat her down at the kitchen table, and braided her hair from scratch slowly, the way their mothers used to braid theirs on Sunday afternoons. When she finished, she said, "Only this, Kara. You don't have to be a fortress in your own home." Amara didn't answer, but she leaned her head against Lena's shoulder, and for the first time in 9 months, she let someone hold her up. Now, there was one object Amara had kept that she hated herself for not throwing away. An onyx pendant, black stone, thin silver chain. Giancarlo had given it to her on their first anniversary. Walked into a jeweler shop in Milan himself. No assistant. No catalog, because the black stone reminded him of her eyes when she laughed. She almost threw it out 14 times, held it over trash cans, held it over the Arno from Ponte Vecchio. Something stopped her. In the 6th month, she discovered why. The pendant had a micro-engraved code on the clasp. A Rossi, family, emergency frequency. Not a phone number, not an address, a signal, the kind that reaches one person directly, not Giancarlo, his mother. When Signora Sofia Rossi received the signal, she didn't panic. She poured a cup of ristretto, sat in her study at Siena, the one with French windows overlooking the garden where her late husband's cypress trees still grew in perfect rows. She thought for exactly 40 minutes. She thought about Amara, the woman who had walked into her home 3 years ago, nervous but unbroken, wearing a dress that didn't quite fit the occasion, but standing like it did. She remembered the first month of the marriage when Amara had served her tea with one hand instead of two. A small mistake. Signora Rossi said nothing then, just took the cup. That night, she called the household manager. She has no one to teach her, show her quietly. That was Signora Rossi accepting her. Not in words, in infrastructure. Now, she made 3 calls. The first, to a private immigration attorney who specialized in quiet re-entries through diplomatic corridors. The second, to her personal physician who would oversee a high-risk triplet delivery inside the mansion's medical suite. The third, to her head of household security. One instruction. No one enters the East Wing without my voice authorization, including my son. Within 72 hours, Amara was on a private medical transport from Ciampino to a private airfield in Tuscany. Lena drove her to the gate. At the curb, she said, "You call me when those babies come," then quieter, "And Kara, don't let those people make you small." That first night in the East Wing, Amara sat on the roti, silk-sheeted bed for the first time in 8 months, touched the fabric, and let out a small surprised laugh. Not happy, not sad, just the sound of being held by something other than her own arms. After far too long, Signora Rossi visited every evening. Not to check the pregnancy, not to discuss strategy. She came with food. Ribollita, papa al pomodoro, warm rice porridge. She sat beside the bed and said almost nothing. One night Amara broke the silence. "Why? You didn't approve of me when we married." Signora Rossi set down her embroidery. "I didn't approve of the timing. I never disapproved of you. There is a difference. And the woman carrying my grandchildren will not do so on a mattress on the floor in a country that discarded her." Amara let that sentence in carefully. The way you open a door when you're not sure what's on the other side. She gave birth on a Thursday night. 2 boys, 1 girl, healthy, screaming, alive. The girl was breached. The medical team worked for 47 minutes to stabilize her. By midnight, all 3 were swaddled and breathing on their own. And for the first time in 9 months, Amara cried, not from sadness, from the overwhelming relief of knowing Her children had been born inside walls no one could breach, not even their father. Back to the present, the East Wing. Giancarlo hadn't moved in 4 minutes. For a man who made decisions worth hundreds of millions of euros in under 30 seconds, 4 minutes of silence was a geological event. He stared at the Karenza, 2 Pranger, triplets, 2 boys, 1 girl, their tiny fists curled, their breathing synchronized in that impossibly perfect rhythm only newborns have. They looked like him, the jawline already visible even in infancy, the slight downward curve of the brow. The older boy had his ears, the younger boy had the exact shape of his hands, long fingers, broad palms. But they had Amara's skin, rich, deep, brown, luminous, even under the soft nursery light. And the way the girl's hand rested on her chest, palm open, fingers relaxed, was so unmistakably Amara that it hit him harder than any confrontation he had ever survived. These were his children, and he had never held them. He didn't know their birth weights, their blood types, their feeding schedules. He didn't know that the older boy slept with his mouth slightly open, or that the younger boy kicked in his sleep, or that the girl, the smallest, the one who had been breached, liked to be swaddled, so tightly she looked like a cocoon. He knew none of it. And every second of that ignorance was a sentence he had written himself. He reached toward the nearest crib. Amara's voice stopped him. Don't. 1 word, not shouted, not angry. Delivered with the precision of a woman who had practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times. You don't get to touch them because you're shocked, she said. Shock is not love. Shock is just your control catching up to reality. Giancarlo pulled his hand back, not because she had the power to stop him, physically, because some buried honest part of him knew she was right. Then, Amara laid down the first rule. You can see them under your mother's supervision. 30 minutes once a day. You don't hold them until I say so. You don't name them. You don't register them. You don't tell anyone they exist until the legal protections are finalized. She paused. Phase 1. Supervised access. Earned. Not assumed. Giancarlo's jaw tightened. They're my children. They're my children. Amara corrected. I carried them. I hid them. I kept them alive when you didn't even know they existed. Biology doesn't make you a father. Presence does. And you haven't been present for a single second of their lives. Signora Rossi didn't intervene. She had told Amara weeks ago. When he finds out, he will try to claim them with authority. Let him. Then show him that authority is not the currency in this room. A phone buzzed. Giancarlo's chief of security calling from the gate. Sir, Signorina Bianchi is here. She says she has an appointment with your mother. Giancarlo looked at his mother. Signora Rossi's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes, something cold, something prepared, told him this was also part of the plan. Let her in. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Elena Bianchi entered the villa like she owned its future, heels on, marble, white designer bag. Hair pulled back in the kind of sleek perfection that takes 2 hours and is engineered to look effortless. She had heard something. She didn't know what yet, but she could feel her position shifting, the way an animal senses atmospheric pressure before a storm. One of her contacts inside the Rossi administrative office had mentioned unusual legal filings. Another had noted increased security around the East Wing. When she had 7, walked into the East Wing and saw Amara, alive, calm, standing next to 3 cribs. Composure cracked, a microfracture in her expression barely visible, but Amara saw it. Because Amara had been trained at Georgetown to read body language across 3 languages, in 2 seconds she cataloged everything. Left hand, tightening on the bag strap, tension, breath holding, for half a beat. Shock, pupils contracting, recalibration, lower lip twitching once, suppressed anger. Amara had tried to warn Giancarlo about Elena during the first year of her marriage. She had read this exact woman from across a fundraiser ballroom, and told her husband she doesn't move like a friend. He hadn't listened. He was about to learn what that cost. What is she doing here? Elena's voice was perfectly modulated. Concerned, not threatened. Strategic. She lives here, Signora Rossi said. Elena turned to Giancarlo. You knew about this? He just found out. Amara said to the room, not to her, about 30 minutes ago. Same as you. Elena shifted tactics. She moved closer to Giancarlo, lowering her voice. She's trying to trap you. 3 children hidden from you for months. This is manipulation, Giancarlo. She's using babies to get back into the family. That's enough. But it wasn't Giancarlo who said it. It was Signora Rossi, the matriarch, stood. And when Sofia Rossi stood in her own house, the room rearranged itself around her. You will not rewrite what happened inside my walls. I brought Amara here. I authorized the medical care. I documented the births. These are my grandchildren, and their legal standing is already being processed through my bon grade attorneys. Elena's eyes widened. The inheritance claim was already moving. You can't do this without Giancarlo's approval. I just did. Silence. Elena didn't panic. She recalculated. She left the East Wing without another word. Most people would have called that her defeat. It wasn't. 11 that night. A traditional trattoria in Trastevere, a long-held Rossi property. Signora Rossi sat across a low lacquered table from Direttore Vittorio Silvestri, 58 years old, former Rossi-aligned financial strategist, once passed over for senior leadership when Giancarlo's father was still alive. 30 years of patient resentment calcified into something lethal. Amber light from a paper lantern, wine poured by Silvestri himself with both hands the old way. She came alone, one bodyguard outside the door. Sophia, he said softly. 3 children complicate everything. I respect your decisions, but there are factions inside the family who will see them as instability. A quiet arrangement. The children move to neutral guardianship while the trust is sealed. Would protect everyone. Signora Rossi answered in Italian without smiling. You are suggesting I hand my grandchildren to factions? I am suggesting protection alone is risky. I could be an ally. She placed her cup down. 30 years ago, you wanted my husband's seat. Now you want my grandchildren's trust. Aren't you tired, Vittorio Silvestri? She stood at the door. She turned. You arrived earlier than you planned tonight. That was your first mistake. There will be a second. She walked out into the Rome night. The car door closed. She picked up her phone and called Giancarlo's private intelligence chief. Build a dossier on Elena Bianchi. 3 years deep. Send it to my son before sunrise. Sunrise Milan, 47th floor. Giancarlo hadn't slept in 41 hours. On his desk sat 3 things. A paternity report. Positive. All 3 children his. A legal brief from his mother's attorneys. And a thin, unmarked dossier from his private intelligence chief with 1 sentence on the cover. Read this before you see Elena Bianchi again. He opened it, and for the second time in a week, his world collapsed. Elena Bianchi was not a socialite who happened to fall into his orbit. Her brother, Luca, had been a mid-level operative in a rival syndicate killed 3 years ago during a territory negotiation. The official story said he was caught in crossfire triggered by Rossi-aligned enforcers. Elena had believed Giancarlo ordered it. So she spent 2 years engineering proximity, mapping his patterns, building the kind of trust that doesn't come from attraction. It comes from surveillance. Her mission was systematic. Isolate him from his wife, remove his heirs, destroy his reputation from the inside. The deportation of Amara wasn't jealousy. It was phase 2 of a 3-phase destruction plan. Giancarlo sat with this for a long time. His hands didn't shake, but something behind his eyes shifted from rage into grief. Because the truth was that he had chosen to be manipulated. He had welcomed Elena's voice, because it was easier than listening to the silence Amara and left behind. He paid the price in pieces. He killed the €200 million Genoa port acquisition. A senior Italian advisor told him in front of 3 other men that he was a son who shames his father. Giancarlo walked out without responding. That night alone he knelt before the ancestor altar in the private room at Siena, lit incense, pressed his forehead to the floor 3 times, and spoke to his grandfather, the founder of the syndicate, in Italian. Nonno, ho fallito. Grandfather, I have failed. I did not protect my children. He stayed on that floor for an hour. 2 days later, he came to the East Wing with empty hands. No phone, no briefcase, just a small bag containing 3 handmade pizza blankets from an artisan in Florence. He changed into indoor slippers at the door. No one asked him to. Signora Rossi nodded once. He sat in a chair near the cribs, watched the babies breathe for 28 minutes without speaking. When the smallest, the girl, made a sound in her sleep, his entire body leaned forward, instinctively, then stopped. He looked at Amara. Can I stay 2 more minutes? Amara looked at the clock, then at him. For the first time in 9 months, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't control. It was asking. 2 minutes. That night, Amara told Signora Rossi he can come back tomorrow. Over 2 weeks, he returned every day. He learned the older boy slept the deepest, but woke fastest at any sharp sound. The younger boy gripped whatever fabric was closest to his hand. The girl, the calmest, watched the room with eyes older than her body. On the 9th day, Amara set phase 2. You want to hold them, she said. More than anything I've wanted in my life. Then here is what happens first. Elena is removed publicly from every Rossi-affiliated entity. Severed, documented, irreversible, done. Second, the triplets' legal protections are finalized. Through my attorney, I review every document. Agreed. Third, you tell me, honestly, why you signed those papers at the airport. The truth. This was the hardest one. But he answered, I signed because I was afraid, not of you. I was afraid of what loving you openly cost me in rooms where people measure power by how little you feel. You made me feel everything. So I let someone else make the downed decision for me. I told myself it was strategy. It was cowardice. I will carry that for the rest of my life. Amara didn't respond immediately. She walked into the small bathroom near the nursery, closed the door, looked at herself in the plice mirror for 90 seconds. For the first time in 9 months, she let her lower lip tremble one time. Then she splashed cold water on her face, walked back out, crossed to the smallest crib, picked up the girl, and placed her in Giancarlo's arms. His hands shook. His breathing stopped. When that tiny girl curled her fingers around his thumb, something in Giancarlo Rossi broke open in a way that would never close again. Elena didn't go quietly. When the public severance hit, a story leaked to a Bloomberg journalist. Italian syndicate Heir fathered secret children with a black American woman, hiding them to avoid inheritance, complications, a precision strike. Giancarlo called a press conference. No notes, no legal team. I have 3 children. They are my heirs. Their mother is under the full protection of the Rossi family. I publicly acknowledge that I failed the woman who gave me these children. I am earning the right to be in her presence again. I do not expect forgiveness. I expect to be held accountable, but the leak triggered something Elena didn't intend. 3:14 inches the morning. The nursery alarm. Amara ran. Both boys were asleep. The girl was gone. A new service worker planted 3 weeks earlier had vanished. The window was open. A text came to Giancarlo's phone from an unknown number. You have 47 minutes to come, alone to the Trastevere Trattoria. No security, no phone, or I do not return. What you've never held. 47. The exact number of minutes the medical team had worked to save the girl at her birth. Silvestri had been inside the family, deeper than anyone knew. Amara's eyes didn't cry. They asked him one thing, bring her back. I don't care how. He went alone. No weapon, no security, because if he brought men, Silvestri would kill the girl before he reached the door. 3:47 a.m. The trattoria. Silvestri sat with the baby on his lap. She slept, against his chest, calm. He held a cup of tea. Signed the transfer of operational control to me. 90 days. Your daughter goes home. Giancarlo didn't negotiate. I'll give you anything. Just give her to me first. Silvestri smiled. That is the first time you've ever spoken like your father, truly. Pity it's too late. Signora Rossi walked through the back door. No one had called her, with her 2 trusted bodyguards. And Elena Bianchi wired. The Bloomberg leak hadn't come from Elena. Silvestri had set her up as cover. When she realized, she went to Signora Rossi. Signora Rossi gave her one path back. Wiretrap him on record. Silvestri was arrested at the table. The girl came back into Giancarlo's arms. He sank to the trattoria floor and wept aloud, a sound his security would later swear they never heard. In 11 days, the Rossi legal team dismantled Silvestri's faction. Bank records traced the order that killed Luca back to his personal authorization. Silvestri was removed permanently, the way power handles its own infections. 11 days after that, Elena met Amara in the mansion garden. I'm not asking forgiveness, she said. I almost destroyed your family because someone weaponized my grief. Don't let anyone do that to you with what's been done to you. Amara didn't forgive her. She let her go. That night, Giancarlo sat on the Cupin's nursery floor and held all 3 children at once for the first time. His hands still didn't move easily, but he was learning. He whispered in Italian, Piccolini, Papà vi proteggerà. Daddy will protect you. Amara stood in the doorway. For the first time in 9 months, she didn't guard her expression. Signora Rossi passed in the hallway, stopped, did not enter. Her hand rested on the wall of the house she had used to protect what her son had nearly destroyed. Late that night, the smallest girl reached in her sleep and curled her fingers around her older brother's hand. Amara wrote in the notebook Lena had given her, in Testaccio. They found each other. They were always going to find each other. Maybe that's what family is. Finding the people you were always meant to hold. She sent the photo to Rome. Lena replied at 6:0 inches the morning between hospital shifts. Welcome home, Cara. The Rossi mansion is quiet tonight. 3 cribs. 2 parents learning how to be in the same room without old wounds drawing blood. And 1 grandmother who understood long before anyone else that power isn't what you control, it's what you protect. Giancarlo hasn't earned Amara's love back. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But he's earning her respect one honest day at a time. And Amara hasn't forgiven him. But she's watching with the careful, fierce attention of a woman who knows exactly what she's worth and refuses to accept anything less. The triplets don't know any of this yet. They don't know about airports and deportations and shadow factions and onyx pendants. They just, warmth. They just know voices. They just know that when they cry, someone comes. Maybe that's the only truth that matters. So now I want to hear from you. What did you feel when Amara placed that ring in his palm at Fiumicino? When she sat in that Testaccio tub at 8 months pregnant and whispered to her babies that she didn't know if she was strong enough? When Signora Rossi said he's learning, tell me in the comments. Should Amara fully forgive Giancarlo, or should she make him earn it for the rest of his life? Have you ever been the only person in a room who looked like you, carrying armor every single day so no one would see? You tired? Share your story. Your voice belongs here. If this story reached you, somewhere real, hit that like button, subscribe to Aurora Love Saga, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Drop your city, your local time, and a word for what you're feeling. I'll see you in the next one.